series. And what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through three stories. One famous one not so well-known one, and then one that's just like, did this really happen? And all three of these did. So first week of this series, we talked about how Jesus has power over sin and death, and through him we have power over sin and death. If we choose to walk with him, we give him our life, ask him to forgive us of our sins, we have the ability then through his Holy Spirit, whom he gives us at that moment where we decide to follow him, that we don't have to give into temptation, we don't have to sin, and death is no longer our destination, but instead eternity with Jesus in heaven is. And then the following week we talked about overcoming temptation and how Jesus did it, and because Jesus did it through his Spirit, we can do it as well. Then last week we talked about God has authority and control even in the most dire of circumstances. And we talked about the story where a cup of dove's dung was sold for 5 pieces of silver because money was so scarce and food was so scarce. But God turned the situation around where I don't remember the term, we'll just say piece of barley because I don't remember what it was. A piece of barley was sold for one piece of silver. Just overnight because God did something incredible. So this morning we're going to look at first a famous story, and the story we're going to look at is the story of Jericho. So in Joshua chapter 6, and we're not going to show the verses of this one, but there will be verses for the other ones. So background. So many of you would know the story of Exodus. Moses goes before Pharaoh because the nation of Israel is in slavery to Egypt. And Moses goes and he says, hey, God says, let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, no. And then you have all the 10 plagues. This is a fun story. If you haven't read the book of Exodus, go back and read it. It's not really fun. It's kind of terrifying, but it's reality. Moses leads them out. They cross through the Red Sea on dry ground. They're heading towards the promised land that has been already promised to the nation of Israel. And what ends up happening along the way is they send 12 spies into the land. They send 12 spies into the land and say, hey, come back with a report of what you find. And 2 spies come back and they say, you got to understand, man, there are clusters of grapes. There are fruit of the vine that is so huge that it would blow your mind. Like they have to carry the vines of grapes on poles. This is astounding. And then they say, it's a land flowing with resources that are going to be abundant for us. 2 spies. 10 spies come back and they say, there are giants in this land and we are scared and I don't know if we can take it. So what ends up happening is the nation of Israel says, well, we're going to listen to the 10 spies. So God looks at them and says, hey, I know this is your promised land, but because you are not going to be faithful to take it as I've said, I've promised this to you, it's yours. You can just go take it. But because you will not do that, I will not let you see it. I will let Caleb and Joshua, the 2 spies, see it. And so now generation has passed away. Generation has grown up. Joshua is leading the people. They cross over the Jordan River to enter into the land, and the first city that they come to that they have to take is Jericho. It's the first city in the promised land across the Jordan. So they get to this city, and this city has a great wall around it. And this wall would protect the city. And remember, the nation of Israel, none of these men are warriors. None of them are warriors. They were in slavery, and then they were tent dwellers. That's what they were. So, and now all those people have died. Now you have these children that have grown up, this new generation. They haven't seen battle. So they get to the city, they see this great wall, and they go, how in the world are we going to do this? Well, God tells them. God says, hey, this is what you're going to do. You're going to get in formation. You're going to send priests with horns. They're going to walk in front, followed by the Ark of the Covenant, followed by the people. And you're going to walk around the city one time each day for 6 days. Now, can you imagine how ridiculous this probably looked? Because the other part of this is that the priests are blowing horns, but nobody's speaking a word. For 6 days, they're walking around the city of Jericho in silence. Just like this. Just like, hey, we're just wandering, but we're not talking. Have you ever been next to somebody for an extended period of time and not spoken a word? Can you imagine how uncomfortable that is, right? It is. It's uncomfortable. Nothing worse than sitting in a doctor's office next to somebody being like, what are you in here for? So anyway, You get to this situation, and they do it 6 times, exactly like God says. And on the 7th time, they say, hey, walk around it 7 times today. On the 7th time, at the end, blow the horns, everybody shout, and the walls are going to come down. Guess what happens? They do exactly what God says, even though it sounds ludicrous, and the wall comes down. Now, here's one of the things you have to understand about fortified cities back in the day. This is where the military, this is where the people of Jericho who were there ready to fight would have been. They would have been on the wall, ready to fight. They would have been at the gate. What does God do? God takes out the strongest men right at the beginning of the battle because he destroys the wall. He takes out the wall. He takes out the men who are there to fight. So what does Israel have to do? Well, they just have to go in and clean up the rest of the mess. That's what they have to do. But what God says, I have a lot to say today, which is why I'm speaking faster. But you'll understand where I'm getting there. But what Joshua says, he reminds them, listen, God has said that everything in Jericho is his. This is the first city, it's his. Just like with the tithe, the first 10% is God's. God says, Jericho is my tithe. What you get from this city is mine. So destroy everything, and anything that you take of value goes into the temple treasury. That's what God says. Okay? Well, guess what? They do exactly what they're supposed to. They overtake Jericho. They win against odds, and it's just astounding, right? It's this cool story. You can watch the Veggie Tales of it if you want to later. You can read the whole story there in Joshua 6, but it's this cool story. Now, the VeggieTales doesn't get it right, because what Jericho is actually scared. It says they are scared. Why are they scared? Well, because this nation of people have walked on dry ground where water was supposed to be. It was stopped. They walked through a sea on dry ground. God has done amazing things. I would be scared of them too. All right? But God, just like the Red Sea, just like the Jordan River, God did the work at Jericho as well. So the first thing I want to lead you to is this. Their obedience led to their victory. Their obedience led to their victory. Not their strength, not their will. Their obedience led to their victory. I mean, how many of you, all too often, when you come into a problem, immediately go headstrong into it because you think, I can do this? Anybody else? Just me? I think I can do this. I can build this. I've learned many times I can't build it. You think I can handle this relationship, this conversation that's going to be tough, and I didn't pray before, and now I'm in a big mess. What I've learned in my very short period of time on this earth is it's better to take a moment and pray even when I think I can do it. Because it's my obedience that leads me to my victory, not my strength. Yes, God has gifted me. Yes, God has used me in the past in specific ways, but that doesn't mean that's what God wants to do in this moment. So it's always better to pause when I've encountered a problem and pray. I'll give you an example of when that doesn't work. Moses, when he's leading the Israelites in the wilderness, one of the things that they're struggling for water, they're like, I'm thirsty. This isn't in my notes. I'm thirsty, and what God says is, all right, look, I know they're grumbling, they're complaining. Just take your staff, hit a rock. He says, hit that rock, water's going to flow from it. Guess what he does? He goes over, he hits the rock, water flows from it. Everybody gets a drink. It's beautiful water. It tastes delicious. Everybody's happy. Well, then later, guess what Israel does? They grumble and complain because that's what people do, right? It's just like the city of Bethel. People love to grumble and complain. And so what ends up happening is that they get to this point where there's this rock, and God says, speak to the rock. And speak to the rock, and water will flow out of it. But what Moses does is he doesn't respond in obedience in speaking to the rock for water to come. He goes, I've done this before, and he hits the rock with his staff. Well, God in his grace and his mercy still allows water to flow from it to take care of the need, but God looks at Moses and says, because you were disobedient and didn't listen to me, you will not cross the Jordan and enter the promised land. God values obedience because obedience means a great relationship. Any of you who have young children, you know this. When your kids are being obedient and they're listening, things are well in your household, right? Right? And when they're disobedient, most of the time, their disobedience is leading them to put themselves in harm. We don't have rules that are foolish. We put rules in place to protect our children and to help them grow. And so when our kids are disobedient, it leads them down a road of destruction in their own way. One of the rules that we had in a household is you limit your sweets. Now, we're a little more free than most households, but you limit your sweets. Well, Micah is my chocolate connoisseur, and Micah knows you cannot do this. Well, Micah will just sneak things and do all this stuff where he's just like, I'm like, boy, you are the worst liar and hider in the world. Like, chocolate? Well, one day I remember get to nighttime. Micah's like, man, I'm not feeling well. And Micah just, throws up. And then you look around the house and you see wrapper after wrapper after wrapper after wrapper after wrapper. Why? Because he was disobedient and broke the rule in regards to treats. It led him to a tummy ache, which led to vomiting. Right? You see, the problem is all too often we want to feed our cravings, right? Let's just be real here. We feed a craving, which is not for some of you, it may be chocolate, but something in your life that, it feels good, it tastes good, but if you continue to walk down that path, it's going to lead you to vomit. It's going to lead you to get sick. And so what God does is he says, hey, because you are disobedient, I'm going to help you understand that this isn't good for you. So I'm going to give you a little bit of discipline so that you don't end up vomiting. We get mad at God when he convicts us. Man, I don't want to feel this way. Well, you feel that way because God doesn't want you to end up in hell. God doesn't want you to be in destruction. He wants you to have an abundant life. All right, I'm talking too much. Joshua 7. Joshua 7, beginning in verse 1. But Israel violated the instructions about things set apart for the Lord. These are, again, God said everything is his in Jericho. A man named Achan had stolen some of these things, so the Lord was very angry with the Israelites. Achan was the son of Carmi, a descendant of Zimri, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah. Joshua sent some of his men from Jericho to spy out the town of Ai, which is east of Bethel, near Bethaven. When they returned, they told Joshua, there's no need for all of us to go up there. It won't take more than 2,000 or 3,000 men to attack this city, since there are so few of them. Why make all of our people struggle? So what they do is they go, well, listen, if it's not going to be hard, we're just going to send 3,000 men. So 3,000 men go out to Ai, and guess what? Things don't go well. Things don't go well. It should have been an easy victory. But what ends up happening is the men from Ar are chasing the Israelites away from their town. 36 Israelites die. It's not a fun day. And so the people of Israel get upset. What do? Joshua and the elders, verse 6, they tear their clothing in dismay, throw dust on their heads, bow to the ground before the ark of the Lord. Joshua cries out, O sovereign Lord, why did you bring us across the Jordan River if you are going to let the Amorites kill us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side. Lord, what can I say now that Israel has fled from its enemies? For when the Canaanites and all the other people living in the land hear about it, they will surround us and wipe our name off the face of the earth. It goes on and on. So what Joshua does here is he's saying, hey, God, this is what you told me to do. And I'm doing what you said, and now you're letting us down. And you're looking foolish, God. That's what Joshua's doing here. That's what he's doing. But the Lord said to Joshua, get up. Why are you lying on your face like this? Israel has sinned and broken my covenant. They have stolen some of the things that I commanded to be set apart. They have not stolen them. And they have not only stolen them, but have lied about it and hidden things among their own belongings. That is why the Israelites are running from their enemies in defeat. For now Israel itself has been set apart for destruction. I will not remain with you any longer unless you destroy the things among you that were set apart for destruction. We read this and we go, what? God wants you. He wants you. He wants you. He wants you. And sometimes that means learning a lesson. What this man did, what Achan does, is he takes things for his own personal benefit. But what God sees in taking something for his own personal benefit is not only saying, God, I'm not going to give you what you deserve, but he's also saying, God, I'm going to take this because I believe I can do more with it than you can in my life. That's what Achan does. Sure enough, God helps sort it out. They all line up, the tribes line up, and Judah's taken. And then they separate by clans in the clan, and they separate by families in the family, and they separate by families again. And sure enough, God reveals to Joshua, it's Achan. So some men go to Achan's tent, they pull the stuff out from the ground, they put it before Achan, they stone him, and they burn everything right there. Now we go, what? This is how serious, the Old Testament is showing you how serious God is about how much he loves you and wants you. We read this and go, but why? Because if you don't learn the lesson, you're not going to learn the lesson. God needed the nation of Israel to understand. I have you. I have you. So sure enough, guess what happens? They go to attack Ai again, and they get it without a problem. Second thing I want to bring up today is that in our disobedience, easy victories become devastating defeats. In our disobedience, easy victories become devastating defeats. You show up and you think, I can do this in my own strength and in my own power and in my own experience. And then what ends up happening is you get made the fool. I think we've all been there at some point in our lives, right? We've all been there. We're like, man, I look real stupid right now. Or, more tragically, this is the other thing. Our disobedience leads to a false victory that leads us down a path towards destruction. I'm going to share a story real quick. Beth Moore, famous now pastor, preacher, amazing woman of God. She shares this story about one of her daughters was this great volleyball player. But Beth could see that her daughter was walking down this path that was just, she wasn't paying attention to God. She wasn't spending time with him. She wasn't listening to her parents. And Beth prayed this prayer. She said, God, the only thing she's paying attention to right now and cares about is volleyball. So God, I don't know how, but would you just mess up her hand when she goes into this game so that you get her attention to understand that success does not equal success. And so what ends up happening is that day, Beth goes to this volleyball game for her daughter, and she's like, you can watch this online. You can watch this video later. Just look up Beth Moore parenting volleyball. And she's just like, everything is just like all over the place. And her daughter walks off the court and is like, what is happening? I know I can do this. And, Beth's like, I didn't say anything to her that day because I knew she was in a weird place. But the next day I go, hey, honey, I want you to come over here and look in Mama's journal about what Mama prayed yesterday. You see, a lot of times we're comfortable when we think our children are on a great path and they will be successful. But the problem is our definition of success is based on the things of this world, not the things that God cares about. Is it a great thing for your child to be a professional athlete if your child doesn't know Jesus? You're going to sacrifice 20 years, maybe 40 years of quality financial health for eternal destruction. I mean, if you look at successful people in our world today, though, you can even tell that their quality of life isn't that great. I mean, suicides amongst the wealthy, amongst famous people, amongst influencers is just pretty staggering. Their quality of life is not great. Why? Because success in the eyes of the world, we look at it and we go, man, I want that. I'm here to tell you, you don't actually want that. Because what that leads to is a life where you live in a fishbowl and you constantly feel like you have to fill the need of other people. I have to do this, otherwise people are going to think this. Who freaking cares? I'm sorry if freaking's a bad word to you. Who cares what other people think? Who cares? Listen, what matters is how God views you. And if you want to be successful in life, then pause and ask God to be with you in your life. I'm not saying success in the eyes of this world is bad, because listen, if you make a lot of money, you can do a lot of good things with that. But the problem is, sometimes we walk down that path towards success and we just leave God in the background. And what ends up happening is we go, how did I get here? Well, you got there because you made decisions along the way. You see, a lot of times people think that there's just lines that we cross over in life. We think, oh, here's this line, I'm with God, and then I'm going to step away, and now I'm no longer with God. That's not how life works. It's a process. Every day you make a decision, and those decisions lead you one way or another. Don't let anything stand in the way between God and yourself. Don't let anything stand in the way between God and your children. Success is a dangerous road without God. So stay humble and recognize that you need him, because all the fame, all the money, all the influence does not equal quality of life. But why did Jesus come? What is our theme verse throughout all this? I haven't mentioned it every week, but the enemy has come to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus has come that you may have life and have it to the full. All right, we're going to share one more story, and then I'm going to wrap up. Just wait, though. It's going to be a little bit. So God's math does not equal our math. Okay? If you haven't picked up on that yet, it's just the way it is. I'll share more details later, but I'm not afraid to share this a little bit. So, Pastor Julie and myself, I'll share just legitimate. So, we had like $140,000 in principal and debt when you add it all up. That sounds insane, right? I mean, that's a lot of money. Over the past 7 years, we got that down to $26,000. Now, we just settled on 2 car accidents, so once checks come in, we'll officially be out of debt. We're done. Now, we go, okay, now let's talk about this. So the way we lived was we took 50% of our income, and 50% of our income went to our debt. And we actually gave away 15% of our income. So 15% of our income would go to the church, would go to missionaries and ministries. That's the way we lived, okay? So when I talk about giving, this is something I live. This is something that I've seen the fruit of. And so then we live off of 35%. Now, I'm going to explain how that's even possible, because you go, how is that even possible? Well, for us, like the house is something the church gives. So I'm not including that in regards to the 100%, okay? But we get 15%. Make a good paycheck, but it's not like astounding where you'd be like, oh my word, how that's good. What God has done in the past 7 years of our life, he's provided at just the right time. He's constantly shown up. First vacation we took here was actually given to us. It was given to us. When we started to see like credit card debt like pile up, because at some point when you're living off of 35%, it's like really hard. And my wife is not shy about this. She can be a spender. I can be a spender too, but she's a spender in a different way than I am. And you start to see it creep up, and then you go, oh wait, like here's this random check that we weren't expecting, and everything's gone again. God's math doesn't add up the way our math adds up. Because he is creator, he is sustainer, and he oversees everything. What he asks for is our obedience to trust him. And here's where we're going to look into this. Judges chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. So Gideon and his army got up early, went as far as the spring of Herod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Do you hear that? Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid and afraid may leave this mountain and go home. So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. So the Midianites, this massive army that is just terrorizing Israel. And what happens is Gideon is this judge. He's this leader that God has raised up for this period of time. And there are 135,000 Midianites based on scholarly estimates. When you read I'll get to it in a minute, but when you read about how many there were, they're described as locusts. The camels are described as sand on the seashore. Like, this is a massive army. And God says, hey, I recognize that you have 32,000 people, but understand that you have too many warriors, because if you go into battle with this many people, You're going to think you did it. All right. So with our 10,000, we're now going to fight 135,000 men. So that means every single one of you has got to kill 14 people, and none of you can die. That's what we're looking at. 1 to 14. All right, and again, I'm not talking about like me taking on, the term that we use here is mature. I'm not talking about me taking on like mature women in a fight. Okay, what that means is older. Okay, that's just the way we say it. We say more mature. Okay, so those of you who didn't know. No, we're talking men versus men, warriors. Okay, 1 taking on 14. That's a pretty big battle. That's a pretty big thing to overcome. Verse 4. But the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. So Gideon takes the warriors down to the water. Divide the men into 2 groups. In one group put all those who cup the water into their hands and lap it with their tongues like dogs. In the other group put all those who kneel down and drink from the stream directly into their mouths. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. So that means 9,700 men brought 300 men cupped the water and brought it to their mouth. 9,700 leaned down on the stream and drank the water. The Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home. So Gideon collected the provisions and ram's horns of the other warriors and sent them home, but he kept 300 men with him. Okay, this is not how battles work. Right? So we're now talking 135,000 versus 300. This is ludicrous. It doesn't add up. It's foolish to the eyes of man, right? Let's just be real. It's foolish to the eyes of man to make decisions like this. Because now we're talking every single man has to take out 450. That would be like if I walked to every single church in this town and riled them all up for the 10:30 service and said, I'm going to fight all of you right now. But all of those men, all of those people are actually like men in their 20s to 40s ready to fight me, right? I've been working out. I'm not going to win that fight. So what happens is Gideon gives each of these 300 men a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch in it. After midnight, after the changing of the guard, Gideon and the 100 men with him, because he's now separated them into 3 factions, right? Because those 300, oh man, when you spread them out, they look bigger. So he divides them up into 3 groups of 100. They blow the ram's horns, break their clay jars. Then all 3 groups blew their horns, break their jars. They held the blazing torches in their left hands and horns with their right hands. They all shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Each man stood at his position around the camp and watched as the Midianites rushed around in a panic, shouting as they ran to escape. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horns, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. Those who were not killed fled to places as far away as Beth Shittah near Zerah, I can't speak, and to the border of Abel Meholah near Tabith. You see, God's math is not your math, and God's plan is not your plan. And so impossible victory has now led to astounding victory because they chose obedience over fear. Understand, because they chose obedience over fear, they were able to experience a victory that nobody would have even thought was possible. You see, when we choose to be obedient to God, what we're actually doing is saying, God, I trust you and I believe that you will do what you say you will do in every area of your life. Every area. The problem is, we as humans want to be in control. Anybody else, right? Am I alone in that? Want to be in control, right? And so because I want to be in control, I'm constantly like, God, I don't know if you're going to show up, so I'm going to do this. You know how hard it is to... I'll say this as a pastor. It's hard as a pastor. I got to be real careful how I phrase this. But it's hard as a pastor to like bet on God to do what he says he's going to do. I've said when I interviewed here, one of the questions that was asked of me was, Pastor, what are you going to do in regards to outreach? Like, how are we going to reach people? And my phrase back was, hey, like, I'm not an event person. So if we're talking about outreach, we're like events where we're going to draw large crowds of people in one moment, like, I'm just not going to be that guy. I'm never going to be that guy. What I believe is going to happen is that as we build relationships with people in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in our families, and we begin to have conversations, what's going to happen over time is that God's going to work in hearts and God's going to work in lives, and he's going to transform people, and we're going to see this church build and grow slowly, because that's what the Word of God teaches us to do. He says, hey, we all go out, do our thing, and then we share the gospel and we share Jesus, and then what Jesus does is Jesus builds them into the family and the kingdom. It's a lot easier. It is. It's just a lot easier to go out and do these huge events where everybody's like, oh, this is awesome. And then you create this amazing atmosphere in a church body where it's just like, oh, we're always having fun and partying. But I'm like, no, we're going to focus on prayer. We're going to focus on Jesus, and we're going to watch him transform lives over time. And what's going to take place over time is people are going to look back and go, what happened in this church? Where we were 5 years ago to where we are today is a different body. Why? Because we've been playing the slow game betting on Jesus. That's what we've been doing. We're just playing the slow game, betting on Jesus to do what he says he's going to do. Because what his word says in Galatians 6 is that we will reap what we sow. So we're going to continue to sow the way that we believe God has told us to. And over time, we believe that we will reap the harvest that he has promised to us. You see, impossible victory leads to astounding victory when we choose obedience over fear. What does that mean for you? That means for you pray about your relationships before you just try to fix them. I talked about in pre-service prayer, this week for Julie and I was not great. This week was just a mental battle for both of us, and Thursday ended up just being this huge fight, not like huge fight, and you probably hear a fight and go, really? But it was a big fight for us, right? And I yelled, and if I yell, that's a big fight. Because she always yells at me. I don't yell at her. That is a true statement, and she would testify to that. I yelled back, which I rarely do, but I did. That's how you know it was big. And don't worry, we're really good. But we're really good. But she's like, I gotta go. And for us, we've learned that when we are that raw emotionally, and when we're not doing well, the best thing that we can do is actually go apart for a little bit and then come back together. And guess what we do when we're apart? We actually pray for ourselves and for one another that God would work on our hearts and on our minds, and then we come back together. And something that I would have refused to apologize for 2 hours earlier, guess what has happened? God has worked on me, and I now am sorry. Because I'm going to choose obedience over fear. I'm going to choose obedience over what I think I should do. I take a step back and I say, God, I need you to help me. I shared earlier about my finances, right? I've given away a lot of money. But what God's shown me is, man, I'm thankful. I'm really thankful, because now I'm going to be in a better place than I ever dreamed of being as a minister at 32 years old. Would have never thought it was possible. And trust me, over the past 7 years, there were many moments where I was like, I don't know how this is going to happen. I think about my kids and how there are moments where I'm just like, man, I don't want to train up my child in this moment. Anybody else just get lazy at moments, right? You just don't want to parent. It's not fun. And then I just feel God say, hey, Jonathan, pull him aside. He's obviously struggling with this. You need to help him understand. It's like, okay, worship team, you can come. You see, your obedience to God will lead to the greatest victories in your life. I'm going to say that one more time. your obedience to God will lead to the greatest victories in your life. Sometimes the problem is we quit too soon. Sometimes we quit too soon. Sometimes we don't even try, right? We say, no, there's no possible way that this is going to work. I'm telling you right now, I expect that as I age and as I get older, there will be an even greater passion within me to help people understand that your obedience will lead to your greatest victories. Not your own strength, your own gifting, but your personal obedience will lead to your greatest victories in life. It might not make sense. Well, God's math is not your math. It might not be in the timing you desire. God's timing is not your timing. The other thing I've learned is this. His timing is perfect. And His picture is much bigger than yours. And He's much smarter than you. In case you didn't know that. Because He doesn't just see what you see, He sees beyond it. He sees the future. He sees the past. He sees your relationships. He sees everything. And His plan is perfect. So choose obedience and walk in the victory that He will provide for you. God, this morning as I close here this message and we transition into reflection, God, would you help us to choose obedience over the things we face in life?